So today we're talking about deflating sales and dealing with toxic team members. And the topic for this presentation really came out of Jess and I's experience as program-wide facilitators and some of the people that we have met along the way. And some of them are really on board and some of them aren't. And we found just some different strategies that kind of allow us to approach them. We kind of have a little party theme embedded throughout our presentation, one to just hopefully make it a little bit more engaging for you and a little bit more fun, but also two, because we really felt like some of the people that we meet during implementation are like guests at a party. And some of them you want to stand and talk to for hours, and some of them you're like, I need to use the bathroom. Like, I'm gonna scooch. So we're gonna jump in here. I'm Dr. Allison Malott. I teach at Shippensburg University in the Teacher Education Department. I also work as a program-wide facilitator with a company called SPEC.
And I'm Jessica Jenkins. I am an early intervention specialist. I've been doing that for 15 years. I'm also a TWOS classroom teacher, so I get it. And I've been with SPEC for about 6 years as a program-wide facilitator. So we have classroom knowledge between us, and Allison and I have also facilitated implementation with a program together, and it was a wild ride. So we know some of these people very well and can picture them in our heads as we talk about them. So we have probably some interesting anecdotes to share as well. So.
And we're both mamas.
Yes.
Our kiddos were up on the screen too.
Yep,
so
we have kids.
Got that family perspective.
Mom brain, there it is. Okay, so for our agenda today, we're just going to talk about party planning, setting a location for implementation, planning the menu, what's it going to look like when you do implementation, and sending out invitations. We're going to talk about the guest list and all the different personalities that you may be experiencing in your building as you roll out implementation or as you're working through implementation at this time. And we're also going to talk about thank yous. How are we acknowledging our staff for doing implementation? So we'll start with party planning.
And so if you're planning a party, right, the first thing that you're going to do is pick where is this party going to be. And so when you think about your location, when you're implementing PBIS, when you're kind of rolling that out, thinking about, okay, am I a multi-tiered site? What does that look like? That can get really complex. Am I a single site? What does that look like? Do I have space and capacity in my building to actually make this work? Fundamentally, what am I going to have to shift about my program to be successful? And so as you think about this, did leadership RSVP? So sometimes what happens is you get maybe one administrator who is really excited about this, and they're like on board, and they're the cheerleader for it. And then you get an administrator who maybe has more decision-making power, but doesn't necessarily want to be involved or doesn't have the capacity to be involved. And so that's one of the things that we really need to think about. As we encounter different types of personality during implementation, some of this really comes back to how did you roll this out? Okay, because some people start to feel a little snarky about it, but they feel snarky because this wasn't done well. Okay, and so this is really the starting like groundwork, foundational work that we need to be doing. What is your budget for this? Okay, so if you have $0, then you're going to have to think about, okay, this looks a little different with $0 versus if I have a grant to help support me. This looks a lot different if I'm trying to do this independently and kind of muddy through it versus I have hired a facilitator to come in and actually spend 2 years walking us through that process.
I also think it kind of jumps onto the point of what are your resources? Are you able to pull people? Are you able to get everybody moved around to be able to get to meetings, core leadership team meetings, reaching out to families, engaging in coaching? Are you able to pool all of those resources, or do you have to be more mindful about using what you have internally and kind of, giving people multiple roles within implementation?
Yeah, and this isn't to say you can really do this on almost any budget. I mean, we've definitely worked with programs. We've worked with one program that was like, we can't even afford to buy construction paper. Like our teachers are funding that independently. And so this has to look very different for them than it does for some other programs or some other schools that maybe have a little bit more wiggle room in the budget. And then thinking about your guests, so your teachers, your administrators, anybody that's acting as a supporting staff for this, are they actually able to attend? Do you have subs? If you're having a party during a day, nobody has subs, right? And so, okay, well then, if we know that we can't pull people out of classrooms to do this, do we have budget to have this as an after-school kind of thing, okay? If we don't have that, then how can we make this work? And so again, that's going to depend on your school's resources and what you have available, but really thinking about it's difficult to have a core leadership team meeting and only have 3 members of an 8-member team, okay? It's hard to make decisions then. Okay, so that's one of the initial decisions that you need to consider.
Mm-hmm. What does your space look like? Are you able to accommodate meeting spaces to be able to do core leadership team meetings? Do you need to be able to implement virtually if you're doing Zoom or Teams or whatever? Just being mindful of, do we have the room and the capacity to be able to implement? Do we have spaces to do coaching? Do we have spaces to do meetings? Are we able to pull everybody together in a meeting space? So thinking about that, because if you're doing a multi-site, if you're in early childhood or if you're in a school district, do you have to do things virtually because you don't have a place for everybody to meet in one space? Or is it just easier to get everybody on a Teams or a Zoom?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then do you have an event planner? So do you have an outside facilitator who's already trained, who's going to come in and kind of walk your program through implementation? Or is that something that you're going to be navigating independently? Okay. One of my favorite shows is For Weddings. Have you ever watched that? Okay. And like they go, it's like my guilty pleasure, but they go crazy with like the party planning. And then some of them hire somebody and they're just like, I am living my best life. Like I'm just going to relax. And I tell them what I want and they handle it. And that's a nice and kind of smooth ride sometimes. But if you're navigating this independently, if you don't have that external person who's coming in to support, then just recognizing this is going to be a lot more work and we're probably going to hit a lot more road bumps and there might be a lot more tears and a lot more frustration with it, which is fine, but recognizing at the beginning that this is the journey that we're going to be on if this is how we need to approach this.
DIY is a learning curve.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to talk about planning the menu. Thinking about buy-in as we're working on implementation. Sorry. Working on implementation. What do teachers want as we work on buy-in for implementation? So I think a lot of the things on there that we see what teachers want: support challenging behavior. I think that's everybody's reason for even being here. Responsive administration, having that support and getting those answers rapidly if there's something that needs to be discussed. We're not waiting 6 weeks for somebody to reply to an email. Collaborative teaming, having the ability to get together as teaching staff or support staff to be able to work through problems, not being isolated on different islands so where we can't connect. Really getting that family involvement. I know this one can be so tricky and we're still coming off of COVID stuff. So like people are running in a million different directions. So we have to get creative sometimes to get family to come to meetings. Access to community resources. How are we partnering with those people in the community? I know the mental health support is like the big ticket right now that we're just not able to get what we need. And then time to plan effectively. Being able to have that time to sit down and work on those implementation strategies and being able to, work through what do I want to do in my classroom? What are we doing as far as meetings and challenging behavior planning and things like that? So those are some things that we know is definitely a need for teachers with implementation.
And we know that, wow, okay.
Yep.
And there it is. And we know these things when we look at teacher retention research, okay? So one of the primary reasons that teachers leave is because of a lack of supportive administration. And some of that is just the administrator is not very competent. Some of that is the administrator is running on like no fuel. Like they just don't have the capacity to do what they're being asked to do. When we look at collaborative teaming, one of the reasons that teachers stay in their schools is because of the relationship that they've built with other teachers, right? They can go to another district and work in a second grade classroom, or they can go to another program down the street and work with 4-year-olds, but they can't maybe take their teacher bestie with them. Okay, and so we know that teachers are looking for those types of relationships and the ability to work in that type of environment. And when we see schools with really high turnover rates, most of the time it links to one of the things that's on that list of teacher needs.
Yeah. So an example that we dealt with being able to access administration, one of the programs we supported, the director was in charge of the childcare portion, but they were also in charge of Child Watch, and that's at like their gym. And then also all the after-school on-sites that they did. So there was 3 or 5 elementary schools that they were also in charge of. So not only were they filling in classrooms on-site, they were also having to fill in and sub at those off-site after-school care programs. So being able to get this administrator to attend a meeting or to make a quick decision was impossible. So staff were super frustrated if they were dealing with a kid who's throwing chairs in the classroom and they need an emergency plan. And nobody has any idea where she is because she's in 6 different sites.
And she was absolutely working really hard.
She was doing her best.
It was just what she was being asked to do, what was in her job description was beyond what any human being could possibly do, right? And then they ended up with 100% turnover in 1 year.
Twice.
Yeah, that's right. It was twice. Yeah. Twice. And teachers kept saying, we don't know where the administrator is. We don't know where the administrator is. Why aren't we getting any support from the administrator? And she's running in circles trying to make this work. And that's just the reality for a lot of, especially early childhood programs. And we know that has kind of trickled into school-wide as well with the lack of substitutes, that people are kind of burning the candle at both ends. But we recognize that these are needs that teachers have and fundamentally unable to do their jobs effectively.
So looking at what we actually need, we have professional development, having the opportunity to be able to go to conferences like this or to have really valuable trainings instead of sitting through another administrative meeting, really being able to touch on those subjects that you need the support with. We've worked with plenty of places that have not had professional development plans, and for us in early childhood, here's another Better Kid Care. Have fun with that. And that's not meaningful. We need to be able to support teachers with what they need help with and what's individualized to their strengths. We need systems in place to support teachers. So what is the process for challenging behavior? What is the process for training? How do we make sure all of those pieces are in place to make sure that implementation is running smoothly? Time. That's probably the biggest thing. You get to school in the morning and you're ready to start your day, and the next thing you know, it's dismissal and you have no idea what happened. So really being able to have that time to devote to what you need to and to have those meetings and planning periods. That's probably one of the biggest things in early childhood is not having planning time. I'm sure it's probably similar in school districts as well. We need resources. What do we need to be able to effectively work through challenging behavior? Do we have time? Do we have money? Do we have people? Do we have budgets? All of those kinds of things. And are we able to give effective feedback? What does that look like in your program? Are people scared to give feedback? Is feedback ignored? Those are big challenges, and I know with the program that Alice and I supported together, there was no effective feedback. It was a gossip mill. So there was one assistant director. Oh, there goes my earring. One assistant director who everybody kind of reported to, and it was, oh my God, the director did this today. And then there was all of this stuff that kind of went through that. None of it effectively got to the director, so she had no idea why her staff hated her. There was an example of the acknowledgement gift that she had given. She was trying to do her best on a shoestring budget, loved office supplies, bless her heart, but gave these preschool teachers, staplers, highlighters, and Post-its, and they were pissed. That was not what they wanted. And so there was even more animosity because there was no effective feedback given, and there was no way to be able to get back to her, this is what we really want. This is what we really need. We don't want your Staples budget.
Yeah, and if you ever get the chance to read, anything by Brene Brown, but her Dare to Lead book, if you haven't read that, I would encourage you to pick it up. But it really talks about that idea that, who are we receiving feedback from, and when is that feedback really valuable to us? And most people really want authentic feedback. Now, I think the challenge with this, at least what we found in our work, is that when that feedback is coming from a supervisor, it's really hard to be vulnerable. And it's really hard to say, this is what I actually need, because they can control whether or not you get a raise or a promotion. And so it's this idea that I have to put on this facade, that I have to look like I've got it all together, when really it might all be falling apart and I'm really struggling. And so having that person in that coaching role in implementation is so important, and moving that person out of a supervisory role. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between coaching and supervision in a little bit, because there are some things that are supervision, there are some things that are coaching. But if we're going to actually give authentic feedback and have it be meaningful to teachers and beneficial to teachers, then we need them to be able to feel safe being vulnerable. And that doesn't come when you're engaging in that practice with your supervisor.
Right. There has to be a level of trust to be able to take that, to know my job is not on the line right now if I tell you what I really need. Go ahead.
Let's do a really quick turn and talk, because we've gone like 15 minutes with you sitting and listening to us right now. So if you could take a magic wand and wave it, and you could have any of the things, you only get to pick one, but one of the things that are on the what do teachers need list, turn and tell a shoulder buddy what you would pick and why. Okay, finish your thought in the next 10 seconds. Okay, just for my own curiosity, I heard a lot of time, but just for my own curiosity, if you picked professional development, raise your hand. It's really ironic that we're all sitting in a conference right now. Okay, here we are. We got that. How about just system-wide kind of change, or like policy? We actually have something like procedures, that kind of piece. Okay, interesting. Okay. How about time? I heard a lot of time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that
That
one's tricky, right? You can't make more of it. How about resources? That can be actual physical resources or funding. Okay, not that many. Okay, interesting. How about feedback? They feel like they wish they had more feedback. Okay. And then what about, we didn't really talk about this one, but just a vision, like you know where you're going. Okay. All right. Okay. That was actually more evenly split than I thought it was going to be, but definitely more on the time side. Okay, thanks for sharing. Okay, so then we're going to think about, so we've got some administrator buy-in, we've thought about what do teachers actually need, and so now we want to kind of send out those invitations or engage in our rollout. Okay, and so first one of the first things we're going to do is identify who that facilitator is. Okay, who's your party planner? Who's going to get everything together? I think the tricky thing with the facilitator role is that they need time, okay? And if you feel like that's already scrunched for people, you cannot add just a new line to the job description and expect that it can actually get done. If people are already maxed out on their existing responsibilities, something has to shift off of their plate in order to shift something on. And I get that feels impossible.
And it feels like that's a pretty common thing to do in education, is to just tap on another load of responsibilities. But we will tell you 9 times out of 10 you're going to tank. We need to have somebody that's completely devoted to the facilitator role to oversee these programming needs. My last program that I supported, we had a floater / behavior specialist / facilitator / coach. Yeah, it didn't work. It was awful. I never saw her, so I couldn't even help her to work on training or professional development or coaching. You really need people to be individualized in those places to truly devote their time and focus on those responsibilities.
And then thinking about, we called them the DJ for the coach, because I feel like the coach is usually the one that people have a connection to, or like, I want to hang out with you because you're kind of helpful and you get me. They have more of that relationship piece. And so thinking about who that is, again, we don't want that person to be somebody who has any type of supervisory experience. Because when we start to look at the personalities in a little bit and how they interact with implementation, everyone is going to struggle with that across the board. And then organizing your event planning committee. So that's your core leadership team. That's who's going to actually work together to make this initiative roll out. Completing a climate and culture assessment. So before you even start implementation, really going back to, okay, what are the things that my teachers actually need? What are the things that are really glaring issues within our program or within our school that we need to address first? Sometimes we like lovingly call this like the basement of the pyramid. You have to sometimes live in the basement a little bit and fix some of those things that are more like foundational or like structural before you can even start thinking about rolling out the initiative. Because if you've got people that hate working where they're working, or you've got issues between faculty and colleagues, and there's just some animosity already kind of brewing under the surface, when you roll out, those personalities are just going to be amplified. And their voices are going to be heard a little bit more strongly.
And this is nice too, because it also kind of creates a readiness. Like, is our program ready to do this? Are we in a healthy enough state, or do we have a lot of things that we need to work out internally before we can even think about engaging in the party?
And then mapping that out with the leadership. So really talking about what are the phases, what does this actually look like in a long-term setting? In 6 months, where are we? In another 6 months, where are we? Maybe, so instead of having that short term, like this month we're gonna do this, what do we want this to look like in 6 months? What do we want this to look like in a year? What do we want this to look like in 2 years? What is our vision? So those of you that said vision, I'd like to know that. This map provides that for teachers. And then kind of rolling into it, providing that overview training with all staff. Because when people start hearing acronyms in education, they sometimes get a little prickly because we have 12 million, okay? And so really starting with, we are doing, this is why we're doing this is what this is gonna look like, this is what your involvement is gonna look like, this is how we're gonna support you through this process. And we're engaging in this to really add this level of support to really meet those needs that teachers have. Often I think we see PBIS as something that we're implementing for students, which is true and great, but a lot of those kind of structural pieces really act as support for teachers. And so that's definitely of value too. And then entering in and doing it through an early childhood, doing that BOQ. And then as you think about expanding, okay, how do we share with families? How do we pull in that family engagement piece?
Okay, so we're going to do another activity here.
Sorry, go ahead.
What is BOQ stand?
Oh, it stands for benchmarks of quality. That's what we use.
I love we got it, yeah.
Thanks for calling us out. We did that. So the benchmarks.
Parents in the room.
Thank you.
That's right.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yeah. So
Even just, I just wanted to add, when we talk about the vision, you know what I'm saying, and being able to have family involvement, we're our kids' first teachers. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And so in regards to that, you know, being able to learn, you know, the inconsistency, the behavior and consequences.
Yes.
Just like how we had to learn
Yeah.
or tracking behaviors, we can give so much input when we are a resource.
Absolutely.
you got it.
And I forgot to mention that parents as resources. You absolutely
Yeah.
are. You know your kids
Got it
the
at the
best.
end,
We
yeah.
need you. Yes.
Yeah.
So benchmarks of quality is BOQ, and then in school-wide it's TFI, I believe. So you guys are using the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. So that's those two acronyms for you.
And it's just how it's like a checklist kind of, and it's like we're doing these things and then we can figure out how well we're actually implementing PBIS.
Yep.
So fidelity in early childhood is at Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, 70% initially and then 80%
Yes.
ongoing. So like we're never going to be perfect, which drives me crazy.
Yep.
But
It's another data point, another action plan point. So it's kind of like a guiding star. So, okay. in your groups, if you guys want to turn towards some people that are close to you, if it's your row, if it's the people around you that you know, we want you to come up with a song that represents your school's PBIS experience. And if you're brave enough, can you sing it or play a few lines for the group?
Just a few lines.
Just
You don't
a
have
few.
to give
You
us
don't
like a
have to go
whole
out.
thing.
You
Like
don't need a concert.
little second here. This is
Yep.
like our DJ party break.
Yep.
Okay, it sounds like we're winding down a little bit here. Okay. I'm gonna wander with the mic. So is anybody, we'll start with this. I'll start with like best case scenario here. Is anybody willing to sing a few lines? Oh, okay, we got it right here.
I will survive. We are the tide. As long as I have a crew, I know we will pull through. We will survive.
All right. Anybody else brave enough to sing? Oh, okay, great.
That's what I pulled up.
I don't need a microphone, so like.
Oh, shoot. Usually I only sing after I've had some beverages, so my voice is horrible to begin with. But we did the Katy Perry Roar chorus, so I've got the eye of the tiger, a fighter, dancing through the fire because I'm a champion and you're going to hear me roar because sometimes things don't work and you have to fight really hard to keep going and find something new. So sorry I didn't sing, but you're welcome.
All right, anybody else? We'll start with willing to sing. Yes.
There's so many great people. I know.
Is anybody familiar with Christina Aguilera?
Yes.
Oh God, here we go. Made me look a little bit faster, made my skin a little bit thicker, makes me that much smarter, so thanks for making me a fighter.
All right. Anybody else want to sing? I don't want to take anybody's karaoke time. Not after that. No, you have stolen the show. There you go. Yeah. All right. Anybody that had a different song that just wants to share what their song was? Yeah. Go ahead.
She's gonna play it.
Oh, great. Okay, let me bring my mic back.
Do you need explanation?
I mean, if we need an explanation, maybe.
You'll figure it out. Just bear with it for a second.
I feel like we don't need an explanation. Anybody else have a good one they would like to share? Somebody give her a hug.
we need to
She
give her
has
a
a
hug.
friend back there. All right, we got another one up front. The Climb by Miley Cyrus, okay? Anybody else have one they just want to tell us about? These are good. Okay, what was
Our
yours?
song would be We Are Family.
Oh,
And we're actually
good.
presenting later today, so you could hear about all that later, but we're really trying to create a family like that.
Okay, so they talked about that their family and they're creating a family-like atmosphere. And what is your presentation session?
And it's actually called that, We Are Family.
Your family. There you go. Okay,
There
so
you go.
look for it if you want to. There you go. All right, good, good. So we just kind of wanted to do that as a little fun break, but also recognizing that all of our experiences in implementation are a little bit different. And I bet if you went back to the teachers or the administrators that you work with and you asked them to think about a song, all of those songs are probably going to be different too, because everybody experiences implementation a little bit differently. And that's where we want to get into the guests and some of the people that you may encounter as you're working through implementation. So our first guest is the host, and I feel like my friend in the very back there, this is probably you, okay?
I'm all of it.
You're all of it, okay. So the host, and you're kind of making these up as we go, but just from personalities that we've run into. The host is usually one of the biggest supporters of implementation, okay? They are the person who is organizing people, they're organizing data, they're usually the one that's kind of out in front spearheading the initiative. They generally can work well with a variety of people. Okay, so they're pretty good at pulling in different teams at that organization piece and being able to connect with different types of people. They're generally already a strong classroom teacher. So they're typically looking for something that's going to improve their practice. They are the person that wants to go to conferences, that takes notes when they're on like online trainings and things like that, and they're bringing it back to staff meetings and saying, like, look at what I learned, this is really exciting. They usually have some strong leadership skills. Sometimes you may not see them bubble to the surface initially, but usually they're under there, or they can be coached really easily into a leadership position. If you're trying to engage the coach, if you're trying to engage the host, you run into them, you might want to think about that person being facilitator, okay, and giving them some time outside of the classroom to engage in that role. And then providing some opportunities to lead. So even if they're not the facilitator, they're somebody that can probably get people to buy in pretty easily, okay? And so some type of opportunity to lead, and then we want to make sure that they have that magic word time that's allocated to actually engage in that. So even though they have all of these really great qualities that can be a huge benefit to implementation, if they don't have the time, it's going to be frustrating.
So the next one we have is a power couple. I think most buildings probably have a power couple at some point, but this is usually the two dynamic teachers that you have that go everywhere together, or teacher besties. So they're reliant on each other for support. They have each other's back all the time. They share information well, communicate really well between each other. Their classroom or classrooms run like a well-oiled machine. You don't really have to go in there to do anything. You know, maybe you pop in every once in a while to just get some FaceTime. Maybe also they're the people that everybody run to say, I don't know what to do with this, help me. And they always have an answer. These are the people that just get it. Like, they get PBIS, they get classroom management, they get relationships with children. You don't have to worry about teaching those things. And this is the classroom that everyone hopes their child is in. So, you know, those people.
Yeah,
wonderful.
like if you have your own children, you know those people that sometimes you get the classroom list and they get the teacher and you're like, oh, okay. And then sometimes you get the teacher and you're like, yes, this is going to be a great year. These are your people.
So to be able to engage them, we want to speak to their strengths. We really want to target and highlight what they do well, because there's just so much that they do well, and they bring so much great joy to our program. For us in early childhood, we want to crosswalk their strengths with the TPOT or Tippy Toes. TPOT stands for Teaching Pyramid Observation Tool. Tippy Toes stands for Teaching Pyramid Infant Toddlers Observation Tool. So those are things that we use specifically in early childhood for coaching. And then considering using them as coaches or mentors. Are these the people that may be great strengths to go around to do the coaching, to give the feedback, to be mentor teachers to new teachers or teachers that are struggling? This power couple is just instrumental in building your core leadership team as well. They are a powerhouse.
Yeah, and sometimes I think if you have coaches, if you're going to have more than one coach and they already have a strong established relationship, that's beneficial because you don't have them kind of pushing back and forth against each other. Often they're going to collaborate even without being asked to collaborate. And so the messaging that's coming out then to teachers that they're coaching is the same. One of the things you want to try to avoid is having, if you're doing like a dual coach kind of system, having the messaging be different between different coaches, because that can get really confusing and really frustrating for teachers. And then we've got the wallflower. This is me at parties, I promise you. Can I go home now? But identifying the wallflower in your program or in your school. Often the wallflower, they rarely share their opinion. So they're generally present, they usually look like they're engaged, but they're not one that's gonna talk a lot in meetings. They're often really quiet in those meetings, and they're more cautious in decision making. Okay, so they aren't going to jump right in and be like, let's do this, 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 and this. They're going to want to take time to decompress, to think about it. I worked with a teacher one time, and I would come in and talk to her about things, and she'd be like, okay, but I need a week to think about this afterwards before I respond. And I was like, okay, that'll be fine. I mean, we can do that. That's okay. And thankfully, she was really good at articulating, this is what I need. I need to be able to think about this and process it, and then I can come back with what I actually feel or think about it.
These may be the teachers that you have to be really creative with how you're giving feedback. They may be the ones that want it in an email, or maybe they want it in a virtual session, or if you have the technology to record them and embed maybe some coaching ideas in that recording so that they have time to self-reflect without having that face-to-face time.
But really recognizing that there are some strengths here that you can lean into if you have this person, so they can definitely be an asset to your team. So as you're trying to engage them, providing some opportunities for them to work on independent tasks. Not everybody works well in a whole group setting. And so recognizing like, hey, there are some things that we need done that you could easily do independently if that's how you prefer to work. For those of you that have like been in higher ed, group projects are sometimes the worst things. Like I saw a thing one time that said, I want the people that I was in a group project with to come to my funeral so they can let me down one more time. That is sometimes how it feels. And so for some people, that's really painful and that's just annoying, and they might be really excited about implementation, but they might not be really excited about working in a group setting. And so finding ways that they can plug in, that they can be engaged without being forced into that kind of like group planning scenario.
And I think what's nice about this too is these are the types of personalities that you can engage in feedback, maybe more anonymous feedback or one-on-one feedback, that they can give that information or those opinions or ideas one-on-one versus having to spell it out, and a core leadership team might feel murky, especially if you're worried about all the personalities and all the dynamics and things. It might be easier to kind of play around with your feedback systems in your program.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then using that idea that they're going to take time to think through things thoroughly, use that to your advantage. So asking them to review decisions and then look for areas that might create a challenge, because they're generally pretty good about problem solving and thinking through, okay, I've taken a lot of time in this and I've really played out different scenarios. So here's where I think we might hit a block, and then asking them to email that to you instead of sharing it at the whole group meeting.
Next we have the OG. She was the perfect fit. God bless Betty. So things that we can look at to identify the OG. These people are able to identify their strengths easily. They believe their classroom is just fine. Maybe they've been in early childhood or teaching for like 30 years and they don't want to change what they do. They've always done it. It's always worked. Why do I need to do something now? I can very clearly think of quite a few of those personalities over the years in early childhood. Very, very interesting. They're more comfortable with what they've always done. They don't want to change it. This worked 20 years ago, and why are children not responding to this now? And they'll put down ideas that they're not engaged in because it won't work. I'm not doing that. I like what I do better. So they're very quick to shoot new ideas down. I think they can be very fearful of trying out new ideas as things evolve, because we know in the world of education, things are always changing. 30 years ago, social emotional wasn't a thing. Now it is, and now it's everywhere, and you can't escape it. So we have to be really careful about how we engage these personalities. So the biggest thing that we've noticed is building trust. I think to do any kind of implementation, to get people on board, to get them motivated and excited to do that, there needs to be a huge level of trust. They need to know that they're safe, and they need to know that if they have feelings or want to oppose, that it's a safe space to talk about that, and it's not something that's going to cost them their job. So they also need that positive relationship. How can we give them positive feedback? How can we kind of leave like a little bread trail of things that kind of leads them into implementation and coming over to pyramid model? We want to give them space to observe, so giving them opportunities to see, how does this work in other classrooms? I know I'm uncomfortable with this. I do what I always do. Children should sit down and not be heard. But how is this looking in other classrooms that have taken this and run with it? giving them time to process the change, because we know human behavior is probably the hardest thing to change. And this is especially true for people who've done teaching for a million years and it's always worked for them. We want to lean into their expertise. Even though it may not be what pyramid model wants it to be, but they may have some gems that we can pull and incorporate into pyramid model. When we do implementation, we usually say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So making sure that we're only pulling the things that are good that meet with pyramid model, as opposed to just wiping out everything that they do. How can we align that with the mission? And then demonstrate this with how it fits their practices with what they're already familiar with. So, you know, we may be able to plug in those skills and those practices that they do, and for us in early childhood in the teapot or tippy toes in that coaching assessment, or whatever you're working with in school-wide, making sure that they understand, hey, there are things already in here that you're doing. We're not asking you to overhaul your classroom. We're not asking you to change as a human. We're just helping you align with what's happening with pyramid model.
Yeah, and I think part of that, the thing that's hard for me about interacting with this personality is that I really like to see change like immediately, or I like that like little rush of like, let's do this, let's go, let's do it. And I was fortunate enough when I was training as a facilitator, I got to shadow another facilitator for, it was like a year and a half. And we went into this program and there was this teacher that definitely fit this personality. And we would go into her classroom and the facilitator I was with would just sit down. She didn't do anything in the classroom because this person was very, this teacher was very outspoken about not wanting this and not wanting this, but the director was like, where everybody's getting something. And she would just go in and sit down. She'd just talk to her about her classroom. She'd chit-chat about, she got to know her family. She got like all of these things. And I'm in this classroom with this facilitator. I'm like, what are we doing? We need, like, this place is a disaster. We need to completely change this classroom. What is going on? And 6 months in, the teacher was like, you know what? I've been really thinking about rearranging my classroom. Do you think that's something you could help me with? And like my jaw like hit the floor. And the person that I was with was just like, I'd love to do that with you. And that was it. And like, it was just little stuff because she established the relationship. She established some trust. This person wasn't scary. I've got some control still over what pieces you're touching. You're not going to come in and like dictate it to me. And so I think that felt like a safe space. Like teachers need to feel safe too in order to embrace change. And especially our OG, they need that for real. And then we've got the ghoster. This is the one that drives me nuts.
Yes.
So your ghoster is the person who is never really around when the events are planned. Like they're supposed to be, but they're never there.
They're the ones that will, agree to these great, after school programs or these celebrations or these parent-involved situations, and then when it's time to sign up to volunteer, out the door.
Not
3:15, I'm done.
Yeah. They give a lot of lip service to the initiative. So they will say exactly what you want to hear. And they sound really good in meetings. And they understand it because they talk about it really fluently generally. But actually following through on those pieces doesn't necessarily happen. What we found is that they are often struggling in their classrooms, but also they don't want any help. Okay? So it's not I'm really struggling, I would love for you to come in and help me. It's I'm really struggling, but don't even think about walking in my classroom door, please. This sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. Probably not this week. Okay.
I'm sick. I can't. Yeah.
And then often they will complain and place blame on other people, including children. So it's the child's problem, it's not my child. Well, if this kid wasn't in my class, this wouldn't be happening. Or if I didn't have this co-teacher, this wouldn't be happening. Or if we weren't implementing this curriculum, this wouldn't be happening. If I could just teach the way I want to teach, this wouldn't be happening. Okay? And so those are phrases that we've heard often from educators in this kind of implementation piece.
And this is one also that sparked from one of our experiences together. This teacher was amazing face to face. She was so dynamic and so friendly and outgoing, and we were so excited to meet with her. However, every time we were supposed to meet with her, she magically forgot, or she couldn't sign on to Zoom, or she couldn't, or she was sick, or whatever. And when it was time to come in and do her classroom observation, it was a train wreck, and it was awful. And we had to go through all of these supervisory steps to try to bring her back to PBIS, but ultimately, I believe she left.
She did.
The program.
Yeah, she did.
So sometimes this is awful, but sometimes
Voluntarily.
this is a nice way to kind of weed out some of those difficult personalities is holding that level of accountability and letting them know you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's where there is this balance between coaching and supervision, right? Where there is still, if you've gone through policy changes and you've adjusted job descriptions, and I know that this is a whole different ballgame in K through 12 schools than it is in early childhood, right? Then you're involved with unions and all of this kind of contract negotiations. That looks a lot different. For early childhood, that process is a little bit easier, right? To make those adjustments and reflect really the values of where we're moving. I also think sometimes there's some level of change is uncomfortable, right? Nobody really likes change. And so recognizing that and giving some grace is appropriate, but also recognizing like you are going to kill this for us. Like you are dragging this entire initiative down. And so then that becomes more of a supervision issue than it does a coaching issue. And we've worked with a couple administrators who have really pushed that onto the coaches and been like, oh, we need to coach this, you need to coach this. And it's like, the person doesn't want to be coached. If the person genuinely is resistant to that process, then that's a really unfair position to put the coach into. So that needs to be an administrator role. You can, though, lean into their strengths. So recognizing the things that are good, even if you go in and the classroom observation is a disaster, find something, because you have to establish trust and you have to establish kind of that safety piece for them. You want to make sure that the policy and job description changes are clear in the beginning. Okay, so it's not just say, oh, remember we changed this 6 months ago. Oh, that's right, you weren't there. Or yeah, we didn't review that with you, but just so you know, this is in your job description now. Or it's in your job description, but maybe we didn't actually explain what that meant. Okay, so right out the gate, as soon as you're making those changes, that needs to be kind of a one-on-one, where you're sitting down and you're saying, this is what this looks like, this is how we're gonna walk you through that. That's the importance of, in the rollout, where we're actually saying, in 6 months, this is what this looks like. In a year, this is what this looks like. Creating a clear plan for improvement with levels of accountability. Okay, so just like we wouldn't expect kids to make like huge strides in 1 month, you can't expect teachers to make huge strides in 1 month. Set a goal that is achievable, that's attainable, that's measurable, all of those things that we do for kids. We're gonna do that for teachers too, who are struggling with this process. And then, if all else fails, sometimes maybe we cross them off the guest list, or they say, I have found a new position, and you say, great, when do you start? And nobody's too sad about that. There are just some dynamics that are really challenging to work with, or sometimes it's just not really a great fit for the teacher, and it just what you're doing as a program or as a school doesn't align with their vision or doesn't align with their values. And if that's the case, it's really hard to kind of repair that. So it happens.
Next one is the Mean Girl. Many of you are familiar with Regina George. This is the Regina George of your building, if you've seen that movie. So this one kind of aligns back to that assistant director we were talking about, who was the one that accepted all the feedback and created the gossip mill. So this person is really hard to trust. You have no idea where you stand with this person, and if they're going to go behind your back and talk about you the minute you turn around to their clique. They are very quick to deflect any kind of challenges or feedback or anything that needs to be brought to their attention. Turn it around on somebody else. It's somebody else's fault. This person did that, and that's why I did this. Or you don't do that for those people. You don't hold them accountable like you hold me accountable, and that's not fair. They are drama driven. They want to know who's fighting, who's arguing, who's in trouble, who didn't show up to staff meeting. They love that, and they want to be in the mix of it instead of worrying about themselves. They are a negative influence over others. So that assistant director that we worked with was pretty pivotal in creating the challenging climate and culture in the building that we worked together. Because she was in a supervisory position, she was abusing that power and was creating a super toxic clique with some of the teachers pitting each other against each other. And she also put down efforts for change. She would tell us in the beginning that she wanted it, but when it came push to shove, it was not there. So for engaging them, keep them out of leadership roles.
Keep them out of leadership
They
roles.
cannot be in charge if they are going to be toxic like this. This is going to sink your ship immediately.
And we've both made that mistake of
Correct.
thinking if we can get them to buy in and we can get them to do it, then we're going to put them on the core leadership team.
We're gonna fix
and
this.
they're going to do it. They don't.
No, they don't. They don't. Give them opportunities to share solutions-oriented feedback. I cannot stress solutions-oriented feedback enough. We are not complaining just to complain. We are talking about what are ideas that we can support the mission if there is something that needs to be looked at or adjusted. Making sure that we're helping to support self-reflection skills. I know that that is not a gift that everybody has, but working on how to lead them into self-reflection. How did that make you feel when that happened? Tell me a little bit more about what that looks like for you. That can be a really big change for this particular personality type. And then we're also going to lean into that coaching versus supervision again. If we're engaging in coaching and we're not getting anywhere, we may need to work on that self-reflection piece. However, we may also need to lean into that job description. Are you following the pieces of your job that you have signed on that you are going to do, especially in regards to PBIS implementation? This is, again, one of those that maybe they also get crossed off the guest list if we can't lead them.
And
back into
professionalism.
into that implementation.
Okay. And then we have the fun one. Okay. Betty, the elf have to come out. It's November 1st.
Yep, it's time.
So identifying the fun one, they are generally excited to try new things. They generally make really quick decisions. So you're a person who is more the wallflower, they're probably not great friends because they're usually, they approach problem solving a little differently. They work really well collaboratively and people generally look up to them. They are willing to take initiative on things. They are willing to jump in and say, yep, let's do it, let's go. They get along well with almost everyone. So they're able to kind of work. Have you ever met people that just like, they can talk to anybody? My husband's one of those people, and I am not one of those people, and he drags me along with him to all of these people. But that's just their personality. That's who they are. As you're engaging them in implementation, we might want that person to be the one who's kicking off some of the planning. So those initial rollouts and thinking about how do we get people to buy into this, they're the person that can probably help support that really well. They are usually an early adopter of the initiative because they're so willing to try new things. They could be a good match for the coach role. You have to be a little careful with this one, depending on how that level, where that line of professionalism falls for them.
Yeah, you may need to rein them in, and this is me. So I need to be reined in all the time.
But thinking about, sometimes it's hard for them to to challenge people in a loving way. I'll put it that way. That's sometimes a difficult process. So if they're going to be coaching, just recognize that they might need a little bit of support in figuring out how do I coach people in areas that they need to improve in. And they're also pretty good at eliciting feedback, though. Like, they can get people to talk and to share, and they make the room feel really comfortable usually.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up with the thank yous and acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is a big piece of implementation and making sure that people are feeling supported and engaged and valued for the efforts that they're making in this huge effort of change. So the things we like to talk about to acknowledge, any individual accomplishments that your staff is making. So for us in early childhood, their teapot scores, their tippy toes scores, did they meet a benchmark with another accreditation? Did they get their bachelor's or their master's? Those things that are really big and really important. Also looking at personal successes. Is it your birthday? How long have you worked here? Have you been here 15 years? Let's celebrate that. Making sure that that's individualized so people feel like you genuinely care. The consistency, making sure that we're in support of the adoption of the implementation. Those people need to be acknowledged. If they've been with you this whole time, making sure that you're giving them that feedback. If they've shown progress over a period of time, making sure that they're getting that acknowledgement as well. And then any whole group accomplishments. Sometimes this can be a tricky one, but looking at recognition for your program. Did you meet fidelity? Did your BRQ or TFI improve? Is your behavior data improving overall as well? Those are things that would be great to acknowledge for your staff and your program. So we also want to look at the differences on how to acknowledge our staff. So tangible versus intangible. We all know, like, here's your candy bar, here's your, gift card to Starbucks or whatever. And then intangible. Do people like to have, just come over to me and tell me something really good? Like, hey, I noticed that you did this week and this has been really hard for you, but I saw you. Taking inventory on what people prefer for acknowledgement. Again, do we want to do whole group, small group, or individual? As Allison mentioned, as the wallflower, she is not a person that wants to go on stage and get a major award. I would be okay with that, but she wouldn't. So making sure that we're individualizing what people are looking for in acknowledgement. You don't want to embarrass somebody who wants to shrink into the floor with a major award. And then considering values of the person being acknowledged. So looking at what's important to them, what's meaningful to them in that form of acknowledgement. Is it a thank you note? Is it a shout out across the intercom? Really making sure that we take those things into inventory.
So hopefully you've been able to think through some of the people that you work with and some of the ways that you've considered rollout, and if any of those people kind of resonated with you or like a face popped up whenever you saw that and you were like, yeah, that's them. Hopefully there were some strategies on those slides that are going to help you in your implementation process. Thanks so much for attending, and I hope you enjoy your lunch.